Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving into some pretty intriguing claims and discussions that are swirling around current events and American society. You guys gave us this really interesting clip from the Joe Rogan Experience featuring Shawn Ryan. You know him, right? Former Navy SEAL, CIA contractor. Now he's a popular podcaster himself.
Yeah, so get ready, because we're going to unpack some potentially explosive stuff. I'm talking election integrity, media bias, big pharma, vulnerabilities in the power grid, and even, wait for it, alien encounters.
That's right. And we're examining these claims not to, endorse any particular viewpoint, but really just to help you guys understand the different perspectives that are being discussed and what the potential implications of these things are.
Okay, so let's just jump right into this thing.
Yeah.
Ryan and Rogan, they kind of jump right into allegations of potential election manipulation, specifically around Kamala Harris's campaign rallies back in the day.
Yeah.
And they're suggesting there was a level of organization and control that kind of raises some eyebrows. What do you think about this? Well, it's interesting here, right? It's the claim that these rallies were, carefully staged, potentially using bussed-in attendees just to create this illusion of enthusiasm. And this plays into a broader distrust of political theater in general, where appearances might not reflect genuine grassroots support.
Yeah.
They also bring up this potential media bias, right? Suggesting that certain topics about Harris's record were intentionally avoided in interviews, and that this potentially really did influence public perception.
Okay, that's a bit concerning. The idea that what we're seeing might not be the full picture. Ryan even goes so far as to compare this to how TV shows use paid audiences to generate that artificial excitement. Makes you wonder how much of what we see is actually genuine.
Exactly, and it speaks to a growing skepticism I think we see about the authenticity of what's presented in the media, particularly when it comes to politics.
Right.
And then Ryan and Rogan bring up this unverified affidavit alleging that Harris received debate questions in advance. And then there's this rumor swirling around about the supposed whistleblower dying in a car crash.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That takes things to a whole nother level. It almost sounds like a conspiracy thriller or something.
It does.
What's the significance of this kind of claim?
Well, this is where it gets really fascinating from a psychological perspective, because even if unverified, this type of claim just feeds into this narrative of distrust and manipulation. And the alleged car crash, which, Ryan suggests could be a deliberate attempt to discredit the claim, further fuels suspicion, right? It plays into the fear that powerful forces are working behind the scenes to control the narrative and just silence dissent.
It's definitely unsettling to think about. This all taps into a broader discussion that Ryan and Rogan have about media bias and censorship more broadly, right? They express deep distrust in mainstream media, accusing them of being mouthpieces for corporations and pushing specific narratives instead of, objective truth. It's a sentiment we hear a lot these days, don't you think?
Absolutely. The distrust in mainstream media is definitely a growing trend, and it's fueled by perceived biases, lack of balanced reporting, and the increasing polarization of political discourse.
Yeah.
And this skepticism is only amplified by the rapid spread of information and misinformation online. It can be really hard to separate fact from fiction these days.
Yeah, for sure. They specifically highlight the perceived suppression of dissenting voices, especially during the pandemic, using topics like the lab leak theory and vaccine debates as examples. What's your take on that?
Their concerns reflect a broader questioning of authority and expertise that we're seeing across the board. In an age of information overload, it's tempting to seek out sources that confirm our existing beliefs rather than engaging with diverse perspectives. And it's also interesting that they see platforms like Rumble and X, formerly Twitter, as these crucial alternatives to mainstream media, claiming these platforms offer more freedom of speech and open discussion. For those who aren't familiar, can you give us a quick rundown of what the Twitter files are and why they're relevant to this discussion? Yeah, so the Twitter files refer to these internal Twitter communications that were released publicly after Elon Musk acquired the company. And these files revealed instances of government agencies actually flagging content and requesting its removal, which raised concerns about censorship and government influence over social media platforms. And This really resonated with those already skeptical of mainstream media narratives, and it really fueled the perception that certain viewpoints are being silenced.
It's a complex issue with valid arguments on both sides, I think. Now, switching gears a bit, Ryan and Rogan also delves into the world of big pharma, criticizing the FDA's approval process for drugs. They actually point to the statistic that a third of FDA-approved drugs later receive warnings or recalls. It's a pretty alarming figure. What are the implications of that for everyday people like you and me?
It is concerning, that statistic. It raises questions about the thoroughness of the FDA's review process and the potential risks associated with approved medications. And they also discuss the influence of profit motives in healthcare, particularly in the context of monkeypox.
Yeah.
They reference this undercover video by Steven Crowder featuring a former health advisor to Bill de Blasio.
Right, that video. What was the big takeaway from that?
Well, in the video, the former advisor allegedly admits that the threat of monkeypox was deliberately exaggerated to facilitate drug sales. And this alleged admission, if true, reinforces the perception of profit-driven manipulation within the healthcare system. And Ryan and Rogan use this as an example of how public health messaging can be influenced by financial incentives, leading to skepticism and distrust. They argue that Big Pharma influences public health policies and nutritional advice for its own financial gain, pointing to the demonization of saturated fat and the downplaying of vitamin supplementation.
So are you saying my bacon and eggs breakfast is actually a conspiracy? I'm kidding, but this is a really interesting point. How do we navigate all these conflicting narratives about what's healthy and what's not?
It's certainly a challenge. The science surrounding nutrition is complex and constantly evolving. While it's important to be critical of any industry's influence on dietary recommendations, it's also crucial to rely on evidence-based research and consult with healthcare professionals for personalized advice. You know, what Ryan and Rogan are highlighting is the importance of critical thinking, questioning assumptions, and being aware of potential biases, even in areas like healthcare and nutrition.
Okay, so far we've covered concerns about potential election manipulation, media bias, and the influence of Big Pharma. Phew, that's a lot to take in. Before we move on to even more unsettling topics, like the vulnerability of the U.S. power grid, maybe we need a moment to just process all this.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been unpacking this fascinating conversation between Joe Rogan and Shawn Ryan, exploring their claims about election integrity, media bias, and the influence of Big Pharma. And now, get ready for a shift in focus as we delve into their concerns about the vulnerability of the U.S. power grid, particularly when it comes to potential threats from China.
This sounds a bit like something out of a Tom Clancy novel. What exactly are they worried about?
Well, they're concerned about the U.S. reliance on Chinese-made transformers for our power grid. You know, these transformers, they're crucial components. And Ryan claims they might not be adequately checked for malware or backdoors, and this could leave the grid vulnerable to sabotage.
So they're saying that China could potentially just shut down our power grid. That's a pretty terrifying thought.
It is a concern. I mean, it underscores the interconnectedness of global supply chains, right? And the potential vulnerabilities they create. They also express concern about China's ownership of land near U.S. military bases and their practice of sending students to U.S. universities to potentially steal technology. And this all taps into these broader anxieties about economic and technological competition between the U.S. and China.
It's like a real-life espionage thriller. Do they offer any solutions or ways to mitigate these risks?
They emphasize the need for increased vigilance and scrutiny of critical infrastructure, particularly when it comes to components that are sourced from, potential adversaries. And they also highlight the importance of investing in domestic manufacturing capabilities to reduce our reliance on foreign suppliers.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so shifting gears again, Ryan and Rogan go on to discuss a completely different kind of vulnerability, the potential decline of human instincts and intuition in the digital age. They use a rather striking analogy to illustrate their point, comparing modern humans to domesticated dogs.
Right. They argue that our dependence on technology has led to this domestication of the human species. Just as dogs have been bred for specific traits leading to changes in their behavior and instincts, they suggest that our reliance on technology might be, weakening our innate abilities.
So are they saying that our smartphones are, turning us into mindless sheep? I mean, I do spend a lot of time scrolling.
Well, it's a provocative thought, isn't it? Yeah. What they're suggesting is that our constant connection to devices and the flood of information we consume, it might be overshadowing our natural instincts and our intuition. They argue that this loss of instinct makes us more susceptible to manipulation and less able to perceive danger.
I can see how that could be a concern. Are there any real-world examples of how this loss of instinct might be playing out?
Well, they point to our increasing reliance on GPS navigation as an example. Instead of relying on our sense of direction, our spatial awareness, we kind of blindly follow the instructions of a device, potentially losing our ability to navigate the world independently.
That's a good point. I've definitely had moments where I felt totally lost without my phone's GPS. They also express concern about the impact of technology on our physical health and our connection to the natural world. Didn't Ryan share a personal anecdote about this?
He did, yeah. He talks about a friend who works for the Department of Energy and the potential dangers of electromagnetic fields, those emitted from electronic devices. This friend suggests that constant exposure to these fields could be contributing to various health issues, including a decline in sperm count.
That's a bit alarming. Are there any ways to mitigate these potential risks?
They advocate for, simple practices like spending more time in nature, disconnecting from technology regularly, and even the concept of earthing, which involves physically connecting to the Earth's surface to reduce inflammation and improve health. They also talk about the importance of learning basic survival skills and being prepared for potential disasters.
So it's about finding a balance between embracing technology and staying connected to our natural instincts and resilience.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the potential downsides of our dependence on technology and taking steps to mitigate those risks while still, enjoying its benefits.
Now, brace yourself, because this is where the conversation takes a rather dark turn. Ryan and Rogan start talking about the potential for societal collapse and the importance of building resilient communities. And this seems like a pretty drastic leap from discussing smartphones and GPS.
It might seem like a leap, but their concerns about societal collapse, they're rooted in anxieties about the fragility of our current systems. They point to factors like climate change, economic instability, political polarization, resource depletion, all these things as potential triggers for widespread disruption.
So what do they suggest people do to prepare for this potential collapse?
They emphasize the importance of community and cooperation in times of crisis. They're urging listeners to build strong relationships with their neighbors, create support networks. They also encourage learning practical skills, things like gardening, food preservation, basic first aid, self-defense.
That makes sense. It's about being prepared to rely on your community and your own skills if traditional systems fail.
Exactly. They even discuss the concept of creating a parallel society that operates outside the mainstream, with its own systems of food production, energy generation, and community governance.
That sounds pretty radical. I mean, is that even feasible in today's world?
It's certainly a challenging proposition, but the idea reflects this desire for greater autonomy and self-sufficiency, this sense of control in a world that can feel increasingly chaotic and unpredictable. They see this parallel society as a way to create a more resilient and sustainable way of life.
It's an interesting idea, even if it might seem a bit far-fetched to some. Throughout the conversation, Ryan and Rogan really emphasize the importance of critical thinking, media literacy, and taking personal responsibility for our well-being and preparedness.
Absolutely. They encourage listeners to question assumptions, challenge narratives, seek out information from diverse sources. It's all about becoming active participants in our own lives, rather than passive consumers of information.
It sounds like they're calling for a kind of intellectual awakening, a shift in mindset that embraces skepticism, self-reliance, and a commitment to building a better future. But they also acknowledge that the future is uncertain, right?
Yes. They end their discussion on a somewhat ominous note, suggesting that we're on the precipice of major societal shifts and that the path ahead is unclear.
That's a bit unsettling, but also a call to action. It's a reminder that we have a role to play in shaping the future, both individually and collectively. Now, before we wrap up our deep dive, there's one more fascinating thread we need to unravel. Ryan and Rogan delve into the world of psychedelics and their potential for treating addiction. This should be interesting. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground with Joe Rogan and Shawn Ryan, from potential election manipulation to the vulnerability of the power grid and even anxieties about societal collapse. Now let's dive into their discussion about psychedelics, specifically ibogaine, and its potential for treating addiction.
This is where the conversation takes a fascinating turn into the realm of alternative therapies. Ryan actually shares his personal experience with ibogaine, claiming that it completely eradicated his urge to drink alcohol. He describes it as a life-altering experience.
That's a pretty powerful testimony. What exactly is ibogaine and how does it supposedly work?
Well, ibogaine is a psychoactive substance found in the root bark of the iboga plant, native to West Africa. It's been used traditionally in spiritual ceremonies and healing rituals. What makes it particularly interesting in the context of addiction is its purported ability to, interrupt withdrawal symptoms and reduce cravings.
So it's not just masking the symptoms, it's actually addressing the root of the addiction.
That's the claim that Ryan makes. He describes Ibogaine as like rewiring the brain, effectively resetting those addictive pathways. He even expresses frustration that such a potentially transformative treatment is illegal in the U.S.
Why is it illegal if it has the potential to, like, help people overcome addiction?
Well, Ibogaine is a powerful psychedelic substance,
Yeah.
right? And it has potential risks and side effects. It can cause cardiac problems, and there have been reported fatalities associated with its use. And the medical community, they're kind of divided on its safety and efficacy. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. More research is definitely needed to fully understand its potential therapeutic applications.
So it sounds like a double-edged sword, potentially transformative but also risky.
Yeah.
Ryan and Rogan also discuss the broader benefits of psychedelics beyond just addiction treatment. They suggest that these substances can facilitate personal growth, introspection, spiritual exploration. What's your take on that?
Well, there's a growing body of research exploring the therapeutic potential of psychedelics for various conditions like depression, anxiety, and PTSD. And preliminary findings suggest that when used responsibly and under the guidance of qualified professionals, psychedelics can help people process trauma, gain insights into their behavior patterns, and experience this sense of interconnectedness and awe that can have lasting positive effects.
So it's not just about getting high, it's about using these substances intentionally for healing and personal growth.
Exactly. However, it's crucial to approach psychedelics with caution and respect. They're not for everyone, and there are risks involved.
Right.
And the legal restrictions surrounding these substances are in place for a reason.
It sounds like a complex issue with valid arguments on both sides. On the one hand, you have this potential for healing and transformation. On the other hand, the risks and the need for responsible use.
Yeah, that's a great way to summarize it. What stands out to you from this deep dive into Joe Rogan's conversation with Shawn Ryan?
It's been an intense journey through some really challenging topics. For me, the key takeaway is the importance of critical thinking, questioning assumptions, and seeking out diverse perspectives, whether it's election integrity, media bias, big pharma's influence, the power grid, or even the potential of psychedelics. It's about engaging with these issues thoughtfully and forming our own informed opinions.
Absolutely. It's about becoming active participants in our own learning and growth, not just passive consumers of information. It's about recognizing that the world is complex and there are rarely easy answers.
Well said. This deep dive has certainly given us a lot to think about. We've explored controversial claims, fascinating anecdotes, and thought-provoking ideas. And who knows, maybe that's the first step toward understanding these complex issues and building a more resilient future.
Precisely. Until next time, stay curious.